Start.
Hey.
Good
afternoon, everyone. We are the 2021 Council of State Representatives, and welcome to our first episode of Let's CoStaRt, a Conversation. Our cohort is made up of VSA members across the entire Midwest region, and we serve to be an active voice and participant in the general, regional, and local VSA area. To begin off with our introductions will be me. My name is David Tran, and I am a rising senior from Michigan State University, and I'm the current Michigan State representative. My pronouns are he, him, his, and my involvement has been throughout the greater UNASA space as a CPP selection committee member and the former vice president and marketing chair for Michigan State University's VSA. And a fun fact about me is that I'm a first generation student.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kang Fan, and I am a recent grad of Indiana University Bloomington, and I am the current Indiana CoSR. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I've been a part of VSA since my freshman year back in 2017. Recently, I was the internal vice president of my local VSA at IU this last year. And fun fact about me is that I own 13 pairs of shoes.
Ooh, okay. I am Maya Powers. Nice to meet you guys. I'm a rising senior from the University of Illinois at Chicago. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I've been in the VSA community since around 2017. I've been on my local e-board for the past 2 years. And the fun fact about me is that I am of Mexican-American descent.
Hello, my name is Ethan
Sam, and I am the CoSR for Wisconsin's VSAs, and I'm a rising junior, and my local involvement consists of being the external vice president in the past year. And yeah, I'm still pretty new to the scene. One fun fact is I'm Diamond in League of Legends.
Wow, sounds like to me you and I need to play sometime, Ethan. All right, perfect. Thank you so much for those introductions. And then I believe Kang will be starting us off today in our podcast.
But yeah, we started this podcast to create really a safe space to discuss about life, school, community, identity, and really everything in between. And we wanted to use this platform as a way to empower our narratives and talk about what it means to be a Vietnamese, Asian American, or really a person just going through life in general. Hopefully y'all can resonate with our stories and just vibe with us.
Yeah, so to all the folks listening right now, we want you to know that anything that's said during this podcast is only a reflection of the individual speakers, does not reflect the entirety of UVSA-Midwest. And some of the topics we might discuss in today's podcast might be personal, sensitive to some listeners. So some trigger warnings for y'all for today's episode include microaggressions, hate crimes, experiences of racism. So yeah.
Today we'll be talking about racial and cultural identities for our pilot episode, how we grow up with and express them in our lives, and their interplay and how they define us, both from external and internal perspective.
Yeah, so let's get into it. All right, so what is race? That's a huge question that's really important to talk about today. And so the definition of race is a group of humans with shared physical traits according to the Britannica. So essentially race is a social construct, right? It's essentially fictional. And personally, like I've always struggled with what that means just because like Latino, so I identify as Latino, but Latino isn't a race. And so like on government forms and surveys and when I'm filling out demographic information, it's either like you have to choose between like being white or being indigenous or being black or being Asian, and typically like Latino or Hispanic isn't on there. And so that's something I personally always struggled with. So before I hopped on today's call, I did do a little research. And so in Latin America, they have this other racial category called mestizo or mestizaje, which is like mixed. And so I think that's something that like I identify with the most because I am mixed. And yeah, I would say my racial identity is pretty important in my everyday life, especially considering like how often I get judged for my appearance. Like being Latina typically comes with misinterpretations about like my intelligence, my temper, my language skills, and also fetishization.
My racial identity is Asian, and it is one of my central identities. Really, I didn't realize how important being Asian was until my involvement in VSA and my local Asian American Association here at IU. Before like growing up in Columbus, Indiana, which is mostly a white town, I was really sort of repressing my racial identity. But ever since my experiences in college, one of my passions I've cultivated is actually now Asian American advocacy, and that's through the experiences that I've had in both VSA and AAA.
And I've seen that story so many times, Kang. It's quite amazing that like, you've grown from like a place in the Midwest like Indiana that doesn't have like a lot of Asians, right? And like from there, like we're able to like kind of learn more about ourselves and then also at the same time expressing. It's just really great to see like that growth, right? I would say like my story is very similar, Kang. For myself, I went to Michigan State University, which is only about like an hour and a half drive from like my home actually, in Dearborn, Michigan. And I would say for me personally, like throughout my whole life, hasn't been like the greatest, just because I didn't really grow up with an area with like a lot of like folks that were, I guess, my kind or Asian Americans or what that did identify like that. And it was kind of a struggle, because there were some hardships that I was going through, and there was some like cultural differences that made it really difficult for me to express, especially for like a lot of Asian Americans. Like we are always taught to be very cohesive and like also very silent too, and also that can go for a lot of other racial identities as well. We're taught to be kind of silent, just kind of roll with the punches, but we're coming into an age that it's proven very difficult. But yeah, I definitely understand that. But Ethan, how was like your experiences with your racial identity?
My racial identity, I'm Asian, and I grew up in Savage, Minnesota, and my neighborhood was predominantly white also. So I had a similar story to you guys too, as where I wasn't able to like express my culture as much. I actually kind of like not felt embarrassed, but it just felt more natural to just, I don't know, like not express my culture. And after going to college, I got introduced to VSA, and I found how awesome it was. I'm even taking Vietnamese class now to even start like learning my language because of college. And I think it's just college has been such a big thing for me to help me express my culture. Now I'm a CoSR for VSA.
Wow.
Yay, that's so cool.
You just see like him flourishing. Like honestly, I could see him as like a future like board member. Who knows?
Ooh.
That could be like a random like future thing. But I guess, Ethan, I know you talked about like culture, right? And so I guess that's something that we want to talk about in our next segment is, like what is the difference between, ethnicity, race, and nationality? Because to most people now, like, there seems to be a lot of like common misconception, right? And so, I did some research earlier before this too. And I got the definitions of like what race, ethnicity, and like nationality is like altogether. And, we're starting off with what Maya said earlier is like race is a socially defined category where in which like we are basing it off of, like physical features such as like our hair, our skin color, our texture, our eye colors, things like that. Whereas with ethnicity, it is also a social construct. However, it is also basing on other things such as your language, your religion, historical factors, cultural influences, and also nationality. And then nationality afterwards is belonging to a particular nation by origin, birth, or naturalization. So for example, for myself, I would identify as a Vietnamese American. My race defines me as Asian. My ethnicity would be Vietnamese due to culture and heritage. And then my nationality would be American since I was born and raised here in Michigan. So those, a little kind of confusion, but there is a lot of similarities. With ethnicity, I would say that like there is like, common ground between nationality and ethnicity because most of the time where you reside is where your ethnicity would be. But however, sometimes that is not always the case. But for race specifically, that is something that like a lot of people focus on, and there's a lot of like myths about it and like a lot of misunderstanding. But those are basically just like the common core like fundamentals what you should know between the three. And then like for other things too, I would just like kind of express that when it comes to race and ethnicity, that cultural identity is very important. I would say for me that cultural identity has kind of grew me up to who I am to be. Before I felt like I kind of had like a void in my pocket that I didn't really have like this culture, right? And from there, like going to college, it helps me a lot to kind of build myself to this individual person that's advocacy and into like amplifying our voices as Asian Americans, specifically Vietnamese Americans. I know for me, like ever since like Vietnam has always had like a very long history. So I definitely think that it's something that's always need to be talked about. But do any of y'all want to share about like what your experiences are about your cultural identity?
Yeah, David, I actually have like a similar backstory, I guess, about being Vietnamese American. I'm also Vietnamese American, and like I take great pride in my culture and being a Vietnamese American. Really, I just recently learned some aspects of my culture, and that's when I first started actually becoming a member of VSA. That's when I learned about my culture, and then like fully immersed myself into it. But seeing various Viet culture shows around the Midwest, and then examine the history of Vietnam on my own time, and just like other experiences in college, such as VO1, for example. It's really made me a lot more curious to talk about Vietnam. Um, and nowadays, like every time I see my parents or my grandma, I would always like try to strike a conversation with them about like what was Vietnam like, the culture, and just like tidbits of information from them, just to get my info about our own culture, like how amazing it is. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, have you ever seen like those things where like you go to like ancestry.com and like you like put in like your blood sample or something, and then like all of a sudden like your whole history just shows on like the screen? It's like it's just phenomenal because like we always think about like really small portions of our history, but like if you think about like a lot of our families, like it goes like a very long way.
Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah. I think there's something called 23andMe, like the DNA test thingy. Yeah, I've always wanted to do that, but I've also been afraid that if I did that, that'd make me more confused than I already am. But David, when you were defining like nationality, ethnicity, I thought that was really interesting because like for a lot of folks, they really don't know the difference between like nationality and ethnicity. Like I'm sure you all have gotten this question, even our listeners probably have heard it, like, so where are you from? And like you're like, oh, I'm from Iowa or something, and then they're like, no, where are you from? So it's really important that you define that for some of our listeners. But yeah, so I mostly claim and resonate with Mexican culture because I was raised by the Mexican side of my family. And so luckily where I live and like in America, there's no shortage of like Mexican culture. It's really easy for me to stay connected and to consume Mexican culture if I wanted to. And a lot of Mexican culture is really familiar and comforting to me, but so much of it is unfamiliar as well. And so to like, this is not something I can relate to you guys with. Like you guys use VSA and UVSA-Midwest as like a way to connect with others. But for me, I don't really use Mexican culture as something that I bond with other people about. Yeah, so I'm kind of like in a different space, I guess.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. Just because when we're in like a certain like group setting, I think something for me that would happen is that whenever I see like I guess quote unquote like my kind of people, I kind of get like this like emotional like excitement just because of like as my time as like a kid, I didn't get that stuff. So I try to make up for it now. It's like, oh, I get to hang out with people that kind of understand who I am, and like what I'm feeling, and I definitely know we're gonna talk about this later, but like how like our youth grew us to like who we are and like how it mattered to us. But Ethan, did you want to talk about like like how your cultural identity has like kind of shifted you into like this position now? Because I know you just started from like Minnesota and now here you are as like Ozark, like Wisconsin. So like what's happening over here?
To start off, like I actually knew Vietnamese when I was like a lot younger, but as I grew up and started going to elementary school and such, I actually forgot it, which I regret a lot. I think it's just because I wasn't able to like practice it as much. And yeah, through like transitioning in college, I said earlier how like VSA was such an awesome community. I found like people I could relate to. VSA was like that home away from home for me. I met all these cool people that same thing used to David. Like it just made me excited to see them. And I think sorry, I lost my train of thought, but
You're okay. It's okay.
yeah, but I think my cultural identity, I just associate it a lot with just being able to like understand the language now at home. Whenever my parents are like speaking Vietnamese to each other, they're not talking to me, but I'll always like try to interject in English because I can understand it pretty well, I think, but I can't speak it back in. But I try to interject them to like let them know I know what you mean. I'm here. I'm listening. I have the culture.
But the more important thing, honestly, y'all, besides just the language, that I forgot to mention, is the food. The food has such a big influence on our lives sometimes. Like, if for all my Viet folks out there, if you know bún bò Huế, that's like the soul food of everything. And then Maya, what's like the one food as like a comfort food in your like culture?
I would definitely either say tamales or pozole. That is just something that I never get tired of. It just never gets old. Yeah, and it's the best. It's so funny, and like in Mexican culture, like everybody argues, like their abuelita, their grandma makes the best tamales, makes the best pozole. Like that's something we all argue about. It's like, no, my grandma makes the best. No, my grandma makes the best. And let me just tell y'all, my grandma makes the best tamales and pozole.
Well, we're definitely gonna have to test that out one day when we come over to Chicago. No?
Yes.
Seems like we all share this like common theme of like going to college and like experiencing our culture in a better light, I guess, just because like so maybe like growing up, like we haven't been able to express our cultural identities. But yeah, I know a lot of people, especially me, like growing up in a predominantly white town, there's not much opportunity, or I guess reason, if that makes sense, to like express your culture, just because we always go against our parents, like when our parents say you gotta like be with Vietnamese customs or like your cultural custom. It's like, why should we do this? Because like, we're in America, we should be in like expressing white culture, if that makes sense. But yeah, for me personally, when I was growing up in Columbus, Indiana, before college, like almost all of my friends were almost always white. And like at my high school specifically, I was like one of 20 Asian in my high school graduating class of like 400. And I was the only Asian on my football and my track teams from middle school to high school. And really my Asian identity was kind of the source of jokes sometimes. And they can range from like coming from just a random student, or really even some of my closest friends in high school, who I still consider friends. Really, as a result of all that, I really repressed my Asian Vietnamese identities, and really I didn't immerse myself in the culture, and I really saw them kind of as weaknesses rather than strengths. And I always tried to fit into this white culture. But going to college, I overcame my repression of my identities, because I met so many people with similar backgrounds, heritage, and identities growing up, where I could actually relate to them. It's a funny story. Like I remember one day I was walking home with like a bunch of newspapers, and I was walking with some of my friends, and we were talking about how like growing up we would always use newspapers as like a table setting, if that makes sense, like put under like our food as we're eating to make sure the table's clean. And I could never talk about that with any of my white friends. So I think that like really opened my eyes about like how I could relate to people in college. But yeah, my involvement in both VSA and AAA really has opened my eyes to how my Asian and Vietnamese identities really are my greatest strengths in life, as well as just reflecting on how unhealthy it was of me to repress my identities as I grew up. But yeah, do any of you guys have any stories similar to that?
I just need to ask, because when I think about AAA, it sounds like the car insurance company. So can you remind me, what is AAA for you?
Yes, AAA is the Asian American Association of Bloomington. It's basically like an ASUB, or an Asian Student Union Board. I get so many stories. So every time I talk to some of my friend groups or my friends who aren't in AAA, I always say, hey, I'm in AAA, or like I do this for AAA. And it's like, you work for a car insurance company? I always get that joke every single time. It's insane, but yeah.
You know, I was just gonna ask if you work for the insurance company. I'm gonna ask you to take care of my supplements, but you know, it's okay. Back to that, I think I really understand and vibe with you on that. You know, because you know, for my parents as well, we also do the same thing. You know, the newspapers on the floor, you sit down, you cook. It was just like the vibe, and I would say that like for me growing up, I talked about it earlier, you know, but I came from a community where like we didn't have a lot of like Asian Americans represented. So it was very much a struggle, because I think something that is really big, and I'm pretty sure most of us can relate on like the whole general standpoint, is that I got stereotyped a lot, you know, like a lot of people, you know, gave me the idea of the notion that, you know, oh, Asian American, you know, you're very smart, you're very silent. You also, something that kind of makes me upset too is like you're very feminine, like you're very silent, like you're not like the manly men stuff like the races, and like that kind of irks me a little bit personally, just because, you know, why do we have so many like molds for like certain races when like we should be able to conform and like be able to give everyone like whatever space and whatever like opportunities they need, you know, because like just because you're Asian doesn't mean you have to go this route. You know, you don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be like a lawyer of some sort. Like you can be anything you want, right? But it's unfortunate that like when we grew up too, like during like the early 2000s, that like that wasn't the case. You know, we were still living in a world where like things were to stay how they were, and if there was a change, we weren't allowed to have it. But I don't know if y'all felt that way. Was that anything that you all felt like in your cities? Because for me, I came from like a much smaller city, so like I don't know if like, you know, Maya, I know you're from Chicago, so like I know, is it like, is the vibe there different? Like tell me, I'm not for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Growing up in Chicago, there's like so much diversity actually. Except I didn't go to a predominantly white grade school in like a very gentrified neighborhood. And so that was like a period of time in my life where I did feel different for like being brown. Like kids would make fun of like my body hair or like my hair. Like my hair is listeners probably can't see right now, but like my hair is natural.
I think Maya had to step back a little bit, so we apologize for that. But I think something, you know, to bring back up is like, you know, like where we came as like an institution for like school. For y'all, like I know I came from not a PWI, but I came from like, you know, like a predominantly like Arab American school. So, you know, like there was a lot of like religious influence and like, you know, such forth. But I know for I know we're all from, I know King talked about Ethan, but Ethan, I know you're from like Minnesota, Wisconsin, you know, and I know like our other cohort, James is actually from Minnesota. So like, I know he's not here right now to be with us, but I know, can you talk about like how your high school or like primary school education was?
Yeah. I wouldn't say my high school is like predominantly white, but it was more like predominantly like American, like you were saying. I think like growing up too, I experienced a lot of stereotypes in like school, things like being Asian, like the stereotype, oh, you're supposed to be smart, you shouldn't be struggling in school. But sometimes school sucked, especially calculus. I was struggling and people would be like, oh, why are you struggling, man? This should be easy for you. I'm like, I can struggle too sometimes, you know? And like was it, I joined track. So Kang, you said you're in track too. I joined track as a way to like try to fit in too, and would experience like stereotypes such as like Asians are only good at like school or like playing games, even though like if I didn't join a sport, I actually didn't want to join. I just joined a sport to try to fit in. I would just be like gaming at home, but I would experience these stereotypes such as like you're Asian, you shouldn't be like good at running, stuff like that. You can't beat me, you're not fast, and that would just cause me to like work harder and like just push myself to like try even harder and like prove myself when I shouldn't need to. That's like the experience I had in high school.
I wish I did track, honestly, y'all. I feel like I definitely, you know, did like a lot of tennis and golf, which is like kind of obscure, but you know, it was a really fun sport. But for track though, you know, like she's a runner, she's a track star. I would definitely, you know, like want to live up to that expectation to like run that fast. It was just good memories, y'all. All right, so I think it's time for us to take like a short little break for us. I know we get some water. We've been like in very good discussion, y'all. But for our viewers out there, we'll see y'all soon. All right, welcome back, viewers, to Let's CoStaRt a Conversation. My name is David Chan, and I am here along with Kang, Ethan, and Maya. So for those that are just coming in today, we are talking about racial and cultural identities. And so I'm gonna hand it back over to Ethan to talk about a little bit more about what that means.
First I'll talk about my experience. I honestly, most of it I've talked about already, but it's okay. So going to UW-Madison, one thing that I didn't really notice this until like the end of my freshman year, and it was like I started like as I was like I started to pay attention to people I was like walking past. I didn't notice it that much, but it was just like predominantly white people, and I don't know, like after I started noticing that, it was just like a weird feeling, you know, being on like campus. You know, on campus you're supposed to feel like at home, it's your place you're staying, but like after I started noticing that, one thing I felt was like I was always constantly being like not watched, but like I felt like my actions were being like paid attention to more, because I always felt like I stuck out whenever I walked around, and it's quite a weird feeling. I don't know.
No, I definitely understand that feeling, but I think I have a question. So like, you know, for me as well, I also came from like a PWI, which we'll talk about in a bit. But I think a question I want to ask you is that when you went to UW-Madison, like, like, did you feel that like when you were like being, like those like flyers when like they promote like all like the cool things about like your college, did you feel that like they noticed a lot? This is for me personally, but like, did your school like kind of highlight the diversity of like UW-Madison? Then when you get there, you kind of felt like you were like bamboozled. You're like, this isn't what I thought it was.
Mhm. Uh, yeah, I definitely remember. I like on the college application itself, it was something asking like, how can you contribute to the diversity of this university? So I definitely got bamboozled when I got on campus. The not the I lost the word for it.
You're
The community here, like the multicultural community here, is very nice. It's like very nice. Everyone knows each other, but it's like very small compared to like the bigger campus itself. But I definitely got bamboozled because I wrote it on my college application on how I can contribute to diversity. I don't see much diversity on campus.
truly a struggle. But Kang, how do you feel about all this? Because I know like, for the Midwest, we don't technically get like a lot of Asian Americans. So like, how was IE for you?
Yeah, true. Before I go into myself, just to plug back what Ethan said about diversity, it's funny, but so in med school applications process, there's something called like secondary essays, and one question for an essay is like, how do you contribute to diversity at that med school? And that's like every single med school has that, and it's like I run the same question sometimes too. And I'm like, I always think like I can contribute to diversity because I'm not white, but it's beyond just like not being white, being Asian, and like how can you contribute in a broader sense, if that makes sense. But for me, I talked a little bit about my time, growing up in Columbus. But demographically, the town is 80% white and only 12% are Asian American, according to the U.S. Census. And my parents are good friends with a very, very small Viet community ever since I was little. And I always remember the good manners I was taught from them when addressing people. For example, like every time I go home, I'll always say like "jiao go, jiao ju gong di ye" to every single person in the room at the time, and address them individually, just like because I was like taught that way. But yeah, however, really, I never embraced my identities growing up, besides just the mannerisms and just like the simple things. And it really took me a while to do so in college. Here at IU, which is predominantly a white institution. But yeah, like high school, currently at IU, and growing up or going through the 4 years here at IU, I'm the only Asian in my friend group since freshman year. The friend group from my freshman year floor. And I always experience like the occasional microaggressions from them, even though I consider them, being close peers for life. But yeah, being at Indiana University has really opened my eyes a little more, because Bloomington is a little bit more diverse than Columbus, but it's still majority white people. At IU, 70% of the students are white, while only 7% are Asian. The only difference I can see, or I felt being at Indiana University, was actively seeking out these communities of people with similar backgrounds, and similar ethnicities, and these led me to AAA, the insurance company. No, I'm joking. But also VSA, and like I've been like able to have a second family at IU with so many Asian, but also so many non-Asian friends for life, even with IU being a PWI. But yeah, I know Maya, you're from UIC. So what are your experiences at UIC?
Yeah, so UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago, it's pretty diverse. So I did look this up. So as of like fall 2019, at UIC is 34% Latinx, 20% Asian, and 20% white, and then like etc. And so that's a really different demographic makeup than like y'all schools. And yeah, I've honestly, similar to you, Kang, like we have a lot of Asian or like Asian and like multi-ethnic student orgs that people can find community in. But I feel really lucky to have gone to a super diverse university. I feel really represented not only in the student body, but also in the faculty. And UIC is pretty liberal, pretty progressive. So I definitely have a positive experience as a person of color.
I wish I had that. Cause like honestly, when you live or like you go to school in like a big city, you just tend to get like that more diversity, you know, like let's say imagine I went to UCLA, God forbid, right? But like if I went there, like I just know I feel like there's much diversity there, right? Even like my colleagues would just be like, yeah, like there's a place for everyone here, and like especially with California, y'all, like don't we all wish to fly over to the West Coast sometimes?
Yes.
Now, with that being said, I think like, you know, there's something that's going on. And I don't think it's like, you know, like it's us, like the younger generation, but I think it's because of like how we're historically trying to change like a region that's been known to be very like, you know, conservative. And like, for instance, like the Midwest specifically, you know, like Chicago has actually been called like the swing state or like the windy city and stuff. And which means that like it origins from like politics where like, you know, Chicago has used to be like non-diverse, but now it's super diverse. So it's like history is changing around us, you know. I would say the same here with Michigan State University. Like we are identified as like a PWI, and by we I mean like the people identify as a PWI, just because with the data that we have from 2019, it showcased that 67% of the students in demographics are all white, and that includes the faculty and staff as well. You know, so there's definitely a lot more lesser diversity. Obviously not the same as, you know, IU, because IU seems to have a higher percentage, but it's definitely a struggle, right? But I think something that is really interesting too is that we have a lot of these multicultural programs that help us get to where we are today. And, you know, it's really amazing, you know. And I was kind of bamboozled from like my flyers too, you know, like Ethan said, like I opened that flyer and it said diversity all over it. And I was just like, I'm in awe, right? But then I get there and I just feel so like isolated and so hindered. So it kind of made me feel like, you know, struggled. But I mean, what else do you want to bring up, y'all? Like, I know like that was a lot to unpack, but how about we bring up a question from like the audience? Is there any questions that we have from them that we can possibly answer?
Actually, from one of the viewers, I'll say, quote, as someone who is mixed race, I have a difficult time having a place to belong. Could you all give me advice or share how I could tackle this issue?
Mm,
Yeah, I'll answer because I am mixed race technically. So I guess like, yeah, no, I'm personally still working on that. Being mixed race is really hard, and I think a lot of mixed race people can resonate with like not feeling like, okay, so for example, for me, like not feeling white enough to fit in with white folks, but then not feeling Hispanic enough to fit in with Hispanic folks. And I'm technically third generation, so that means like my grandparents are from Mexico, but my parents are from here, and I am also from here. And so I grew up very Americanized, um, despite being like raised by the Mexican side of my family and being like physically distinctly a person of color. And I don't know, it's just, yeah, we have it hard, not gonna lie. Like I feel like in this society, how do I say it? Like there's a lot of expectations that people have. Like for example, if you're white and if you're of Irish or German descent, people don't like assume that you speak Gaelic or German. But if you're like of Mexican descent, for example, like me, people automatically have these expectations like, oh, you speak Spanish and much more, like you're this, you're that. And that's a part of the reason why I'm like personally attracted to predominantly Asian spaces. Yeah, so as y'all know, like I have a lot of involvement in VSA. I'm also in AKD5, which is like the largest Asian interest sorority. And I tend to be drawn to these spaces because honestly, y'all are really welcoming and y'all don't really have expectations on like who I should be, or like I don't have as much expectations to live up to when I'm like around y'all. So but recently I've been trying to keep myself, you know, accountable of like the space that I take up in Asian communities. So like VSA and AKD5 and like the roles that I have, I never want to be seen as somebody who's like invading a sanctuary space for Asian Americans, or somebody who's like hijacking leadership roles. That are meant for like Asian folks. So I do think about that a lot. But yeah, back to the question. I am currently trying to be better with like not being so afraid of like Mexican culture and Mexican spaces and communities. I do really want to be more involved with my own community, and I'm trying to be really open-minded about learning about my own community. So one of the strategies I have is just to find people that I resonate with in the communities that I'm already in. So for example, like when I go to a VSA GBM, well, at least at UIC, like there's usually other Hispanics there. So I'm like, hey, I talk to them and I can like make a connection with them. Or like even in AKD5, like not at my chapter, but at other chapters, I'll see like other Latino girls. I'll be like, hey, like let's be friends. So that's one of the strategies that I use right now to kind of like find a space. But yeah, hopefully, as I get older, it'll get easier, and I'm working on it. But I understand, like whoever asked this question, it can be really, really hard to find a space where you fit in.
Mhm.
But you
No.
got this.
No, that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing, and I think that really helped like our fellow like followers and listeners for that. But I think I do have a question though. I know for like the demographic here, like I'm not biracial, and so like I kind of want to know, right? So and for those that are kind of wondering too, like for those who may have friends or colleagues or coworkers or even family members that are biracial or have like that intersectionality, what can we do to support y'all more?
That's a really great question. Honestly, nobody has ever asked me like, what can we do to support you? Like, so that means a lot. So thank you for asking me that. And I honestly just think like how I kind of explained to you guys, like the reason why I find comfort in VSA and the reason why I find comfort in like these predominantly Asian spaces is because y'all tend to not have like expectations on like who I should be. And so whenever you are interacting with a biracial person or have a biracial friend, just don't have assumptions or expectations about like who they are or like what type of person they are, because we are bound by stereotypes and expectations all the time. So it's really nice to be around people who like just expect us to be ourselves. So I would say that's one of the things y'all can do is just have an open mind. Yeah.
Of course, I'll keep that in mind for the future. All right. Kang or Ethan, did you all have any questions or comments about what has just, Maya has unpacked for us to learn and educate ourselves on?
I have one thing. It's not. It's actually just going back to the question itself. About having like difficulty finding a place to belong. My only advice for that would be just like actively seeking out communities that of people that you want to like be with. I guess that makes sense. So, for example, like I already talked about how like I actively seeked out VSA and AAA, and like it's changed my life for the better. Especially looking at my identities and like how I was able to just embrace my identities, and because I was able to actively seek out these communities. Didn't have that opportunity growing up in high school because obviously we didn't have a VSA at high school or like any Asian interest organizations growing up. So like having that availability is there. And then this is like, I guess this is like not just, this can relate to all people, but in terms of finding a place to belong, like in terms of people, like don't change who you are. In my opinion, the right people, the people you actually should belong with, will accept you no matter who you are, and the wrong people will always try to make you change for them. And that's one thing I like looking back in high school. Like I changed myself to belong with a lot of people. And looking back, that's why one of the like biggest regrets I had in high school. And like during college, like in all my friending groups, like I decided to, you know what, just be who I am and don't change for anyone. For me, I'm a very loud, energetic person, but like I'm very motivating and determined, and I have not let anyone say or let like make. I don't let anyone tell me like to be someone that I did not want to be or who I wasn't at the time. Because in my opinion, like you shouldn't change yourself for others. Just be who you are, and the right people will accept you for who you are.
Preach to the choir. Would you be my professor, please?
Yes, preach, King. Yeah, no, I really, really like that. Honestly, like that's kind of that's like the one thing that I have for me is just like my individuality. Especially like when I was a freshman and I joined like my sorority AKD5 was like one of the first things I joined, and I was like I was like like should I try to be like all these Asian girls or should I just be myself? And I found that being myself, it came with like a lot of hardships, but it's so rewarding, especially like now that I'm older. And I just that's my true self is who I bring to like any of the spaces that I join. So I really resonate with that, King. Yes.
Comment going off of that. Yeah, I agree with Kang too. Uh, just find a community or anywhere that you can feel comfortable being yourself. You're allowed to, like, as an individual, you can do whatever you want that makes you happy. You have like a right to do whatever you want to try and make you happy, and you shouldn't have to like put yourself down or like change yourself to like fit into that community. What Kang was saying, like if they're really where you're meant to be, they'll accept you no matter what.
Wow. I want y'all to like foster my children in the future, teach them all these like life wisdom words, y'all. But yeah, I just want to say that too, like for like the viewers out there, is like, you know, be yourself. You know, like recently I went through like a lifelong like, you know, realization about myself, you know, and it has been so nice to kind of be who I am. Like I don't feel like I'm hiding behind a shadow anymore. And it's kind of beautiful, you know, because in most of the world now, like a lot of us aren't able to be who we are because, you know, parents or like the society of treating us how we are. But you know what? Just be yourself. Who's gonna tell you what to do? You know, it's your life. It is your life to live. And you know, for those out there that maybe come from an area that aren't able to like kind of amplify their voices of who they are, make it a voice. You know, make it happen. You know, I know from my school recently, we used to never be able to like identify as more than one race on like our like information for like school forms and such. But someone made that happen, and that was like a pride moment for me because it was just like someone here wants to make a difference, and I'm all for it. So you know, if you ever see anyone that's trying to like make a change at your school, you know, take the time to see what they're up to and see if you can support them, because you know the more connections and the more followers that you get together is going to help you make a better change for your school, your community, and even your home. But yeah, thank you all so much for sharing that. But you know, I know there was a lot to unpack, you know, and I know that people are very eager to kind of learn more. So, you know, the CoSR cohort and I have been able to kind of gather some like information and toolkits that y'all can use as resources in case you ever want to learn more about this, right? And so for this one that we actually have is the multiracial toolkit. And for those that are kind of learning or understanding more about multiracial identity and kind of want to understand like the terminology, the foundation, and you know, be able to see what is needed and like how we can support, do check out Rochester's Racial Justice Multicultural Toolkit. The website link will be linked into UVSA-Midwest.org's website under tab for CoSR Project. And then from there, be able to show you more about information. And secondly, too, UVSA-Midwest's involvement is a great opportunity for you to learn more about these variety subjects, y'all. That's how me, Kang, Ethan, Maya got to where we are today. And you know, for those that want to learn more about this opportunity, especially with Vietnamese identity, be sure to keep up with UVSA-Midwest's website. And I'll spell it out for those that are listening on Spotify right now. But the website is UVSA-MIDWEST.org. Hopefully I spelled that right. I'm not for sure, but it's UVSA-Midwest.org. And I do know Kang has some really great resources. So let's see if Kang would like to plug them in, is what they say, I heard.
No problem. Yeah, so I have two resources. They're basically two novels. This is one novel I've heard about. It's called "Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?" and it's authored by Beverly Daniel Tatum, and examines like self-segregation and issues of race in the public school system that leads to this self-segregation. It just talks about how at the time the prevailing view of Black kids sitting together, or just like races sitting like in like self-segregating in the public school system was like a negative, and how it needed to be prevented, when really in actuality people need to be more open and talk about the racial issues that lead to self-segregation, instead of just like ignoring them and doing nothing to do anything. You just aim to prevent it. That makes sense, especially and just talking about these issues is extremely important, especially when people are uncomfortable. The big thing I got away from this novel is the fact that it actually came out in 1997, which just really just emphasizes how long racism has really been an institutional issue in the US. And then the second novel that I'm actually currently reading, it's called Just Mercy, and it's also a movie adaptation with the same name. It talks about a lawyer, and he is how he was able to prove the innocence of a convicted Black man on death row, of a murder crime that he easily did not commit, with so many evidence and alibis supporting him, but the law system in Alabama at the time, how it had like a lot of racial disparities and was like basically convicted him for no reason at all. And as I was reading this, like it just really opened my eyes to how especially racial disparities in the law system were like prevalent at the time. And the crazy thing is, he was convicted literally in 1989. So literally like just 30 years ago this happened. And I know people talk about like how racism is a small thing, or like not a small thing, but like racism was only in like the 1800s because of slavery, and like after slavery ended, like we were all fine in that. But like racism is still a prevalent thing today, and it is a terrible issue. And like it's apparent unconsciously and consciously in every system, including the law system, healthcare system, public school system. Like it's really become an institutional issue in the US. But yeah.
I definitely see like a lot of like intersectionalities, especially with like health and like policy. Like you will see that like I've even heard like I think of research that like even some doctors and like nurses are like stereotyping because of someone's race. And when you're working in the health sector, aren't you supposed to be like inclusive of all races and all people? So it's kind of interesting. But I know we have some remaining questions, so I want to get back to Ethan because I know Ethan's eager to just tell us what these questions are.
I want to say thank you for providing the resources where people could reach out. So one of the questions from the viewers is, cultural identity can be complicated to discover and can take some time to fully discover it. When was the time that you felt like you knew who you are and how or identify yourself culturally?
I can answer this one real fast. So the time that I felt like I knew who I was actually in college. And this is through my involvement through AAA VSA. I feel like I keep saying this, but it's insane how important me being in VSA and AAA was on my life, and how it really opened my eyes to identify myself culturally and racially, and just how I embrace these two identities really well. This is the exact time that I knew who I was and like felt proud of it was actually in March of 2019 at Indiana University in the Monroe Convention Center at the last day of the Vietnamese Interacting as One conference that was held at Indiana University. Just like being in that room full of everyone, great people, just listening to everyone, just like the closing ceremony really like opened my eyes and be like, wow, like I'm a Vietnamese American and I'm really proud to be a Vietnamese American. So, yeah.
That can be you on the stage one day, don't worry. But yes, awesome. I think I just want to keep it short because I know we are trying to keep up on time, but I would say same too is that VSA has done a lot more for me than it has for others. It definitely gave me a space for me to be myself and kind of figure out myself at the same time. And I think one thing that I would tell people is give it a try, give it worth a shot. I think a lot of people think that like these organizations aren't worth it sometimes, or like like there are just so many flaws with them. But something to remember is that for every flaw and every darkness there is, there's always going to be light. It's just how you find it and how you procure it. Oh wow, that was so much. Is there any other questions, Ethan? Man, you're hitting us so hard today.
One more question left. What are ways to promote your culture or be more educated about your culture? I can quickly start off by a quick answer. One way to do that is just by stepping out and joining one of these organizations such as VSA. Just like making that first step to try and be involved.
Yeah, and I think a more personal one, just for those that are maybe not like as like aware of like their culture, is ask your parents, or like ask like some of like your mentors and like community members. Like I feel like a lot of people kind of are scared of like asking stories, but like if one thing I've learned is that storytelling is something that a lot of our parents and grandparents like to do. And from storytelling we can learn more about ourselves, we can learn more about our families, and also a lot more about our history. So I think give it a shot and reach out to your community members, your loved ones, and just ask them, what does my culture mean? Like, what do we do? Like, what's tradition, Oh, wow. I know, Maya, that you come from a different background, but like, what would you answer to this question? Like, how would you figure out more about one's culture and heritage?
Yeah, so I actually really like what you said. Like, I think oral histories are so valuable, and I just learned about oral histories and storytelling, generational storytelling. I just learned about that like when I got to college, and I really want to take the time and like interview like my grandma, my uncle, and like just have like hear their stories and hear the history, and like there's probably so much history that I don't know. So yeah, I actually really want to try that out. And I'm hoping that it'll be something that like brings me closer to my identity.
Yes, I think we're all like in a position where we are just learning about ourselves every day, and it's gonna be great, y'all. I just know it. But yes, all right. Well, thank you, Ethan. You got any more surprise attacks on us? Are you gonna attack us with anything else?
Okay, I got one more comment from the viewer, so I'll just say it. Quote, I've come through a journey where my racial identity has been stereotyped and normalized through American history. It's an annoyance to see that the world that we live in serves an exclusive group and tends to disregard and leave out the BIPOC and APITA communities. As a person of color, let it be a reminder that our voices matter and we should use them to amplify our fellow allies and communities.
Yes,
To the choir.
snapping to that.
Whoever this person is, please reach out to us. I need to know more. So articulate sometimes. But yeah, oh my gosh. Okay. Well then, I think it's time for some kudos, Ethan. Who deserves some shout outs today in our episode?
Moving on to the
Kudos. The first one is for David Tran.
Oh god. Oh no.
Okay. Quote, you've made a lot of growth since I met you at the 2019 Leadership Summit at OSU. Your involvement and dedication to the organization on multiple levels, local, regional, and national, is an inspiration to the community. I personally think you far exceeded myself when I was state representative. Continue what you're doing, and I'm proud of you. Quote from David's twin, Jason Yo.
Oh my
I can't say that last name. Jason Yo. Yeah.
Jason, no. Oh, we love Jason.
Okay.
Oh wow, my gosh. I'm kind of shy, y'all. I don't like
Oh.
All right. Oh, is there any other kudos there, Ethan?
next kudos.
This is to Maya Powers. Quote, thank you for being part of our community. We love your energy. I love that VSA is not a Vietnamese exclusive space, and folks like you remind me of how important it is to take the initiative to invite non-Vietnamese and non-APITA folks into our space to really promote and spread our culture. I hope you continue to stay involved. Quote.
Maya, look at you, a trendsetter.
I know. Yeah, no, I was gonna say this earlier, but when you were plugging UNASPA, I was thinking like, yes, at all of the non-Asian, non-Vietnamese listeners, I think it is so rewarding to attend like the events or like UNASPA events. Like even if you don't identify with being Vietnamese American, you can still learn so much about yourself from just like attending these events, and also just like educate yourself. It's so important. Yeah, but yeah, okay, cool, thanks.
Like that, like I think what's that like TikTok? It's like she's a runner, she's a track star. I could just see Maya like trend setting everything. All right. Is there any other kudos, Ethan?
Kudos.
There's
one more to Linda. Quote, thank you for your tremendous work and patience that you have for serving your body. Our cohort would not be the same without you. Quote.
Okay, I kind of wrote that one. Linda, y'all.
Linda.
Just want to show some appreciation for our so if y'all don't know, Linda Ngo is our internal vice president for the UVSA-Midwest region. So if you ever see her, give her a hello, give her, lots of love. She's been working super hard, y'all.
Yes.
All right. So Maya, you want to close us out?
Yeah, so speaking of behind the scenes people, so I just want to give a final thanks to all the behind the scenes folks, the people who are not, talking right now, who have contributed to this amazing project. So there's Molly, the marketing lead, and then there's also Jennifer, the amazing Jennifer from the editing and presenting team. And then last but not least, James, the best moral support, our cohort. Could ask for James, our cheerleader. We love you, James. Thank you so much. Yeah, so you guys are appreciated as well.
Honestly, if it wasn't for our cohort, things will not be the same. But with that being said, I just want to thank everyone for joining us on our very first episode for Let's Start my goodness, our first episode of Let's CoStaRt a Conversation. Next time when we're back here with episode 2, we'll be discussing sexual and gender identities. Have a great rest of the week and see you later for episode 2. Bye.
Bye.